Well, hi, how are you all doing? Hopefully doing well. Again, we're back to talk here about, well, part two
Yes.
of Vietnam. We
Well, this
finished
is
up.
where the action builds.
Yes. This is kind of the climax, if you will, this is kind of the leading action of what's
Yes,
going on with the
leading
war. Last time we talked a little bit about some of those beginning battles, Ia Drang, with the first of these troops actually going in and seeing combat against the North Vietnamese Viet Cong, but
And
now
being
things-
successful.
Yes.
Being successful.
That's-
I mean, Ia Drang especially showed that we could put forces wherever we wanted.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we literally dropped a battalion of men right next door
Mm-hmm.
to a VC division, or an NVA division, actually,
Right.
and stood our ground.
Which is huge with a country like Vietnam.
Well, especially when you think that, like the commander of that division is an experienced fighter. He's been fighting the Japanese, the French,
Right.
and now the Americans
Yeah.
for his whole life. So it's not like he's some dunderhead who's just, I don't know what to do.
Right.
He understands how to defeat this airborne operation. It's on helicopters, but it's got the same principle.
Mhm.
You put men in from the air,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to hold a perimeter. If they can't hold that perimeter, they die.
Right.
And so that's what he tries to do. But at the end of the battle, a week later, there's no Americans left near that mountain.
Which, unfortunately, is something that we'll find
Well,
more frequently.
which leads to a level of frustration, especially at home, where people
Right.
don't understand attrition warfare.
Right.
And honestly, attrition warfare is a hard sell.
It is.
It's a hard sell. It's literally, we need to kill more of them than they kill us.
Yeah.
And we need numbers like 10, 12 to 1 to really make a significant difference in the North.
Right.
And that's the goal. But that's what it leaves us with, which means we need more troops.
Which, unfortunately, is kind of it will have its positives and negatives. By 1965, by the end of 1965, we're over 184,000 troops in country.
Yes. Yes. So, I mean, that's a goodly number of troops.
It is.
I don't know how that works out in divisions because the support echelons are always so variable.
Right.
A division is usually between 20 and 25,000, but then when you add support, who knows? But either way, you're talking 6 or 7 divisions for sure.
Right.
I mean, that means they're not at home
No.
in America anymore.
No.
They've been redeployed. 1st Cav is here.
Right.
82nd Airborne's here.
Right.
1st Airborne's here. 1st Marine Division's here.
There are a lot.
I mean, that's a lot of guys.
Yes.
But we also need to replace these guys and build up these units that are smaller.
Right.
The ones that weren't considered, I guess, frontline in the American way of thinking,
Right. Yeah.
or they had National Guard detachments that aren't getting called up,
Yeah.
which, needless to say, causes some upset would probably be the good word.
Yes, I would agree.
Some resentment
Yeah.
that you're not calling up the National Guard. That's what they signed up for.
Yeah, the whole point of them being in a more state militia almost is to prevent that major buildup of the regular army.
Well, yeah, and which makes it cheaper because you only pay them for the weekend instead of for a whole month. They don't get extra leave and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it leads to, although I've never heard it mentioned, you would think it would lead to part of the protest.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I getting drafted and dragged out of my job?
Mm-hmm.
I've just gotten started at a new career because I'm 21 years old. I finally left home because that wasn't unusual then.
Right.
Being 21 and living in your parents' house was not even thought of as a thing.
Yeah.
That was just normal. You didn't move out until you had a really good paying job or you got married.
True.
That was just the way it was. So you have these guys, I just got started at this job, I'm going to make this my career, and suddenly you're going to tell me I got to go to the Army for 2 years? Why doesn't Bob down the street, who puts on a uniform and acts tough once a month,
A little weekend
why isn't
warrior.
he going?
Yeah.
He signed up for this. He raised
Right.
his right hand.
Right. Which, being a member of the National Guard myself, I realized, hey, I'm willing and able to go and do what any other person in the military can do.
Mm-hmm.
Put me there, but I understand why the frustration. Why the
Well, yeah,
frustration?
I would
You know,
think it would be frustrating.
if you're
Even for
working-
people who supported the war,
Right.
why are you taking me first? It's
Right.
supposed to be the regular army, then the guard,
right,
and then
call
the draft.
Right.
Then we start adding people.
Well, you know, that's
But-
what happens when you get political with your war.
Well, the refusal to think of it as a war.
Yes, yes. This is,
I mean, the politicians always were conflict.
right.
I don't know that they used police action like they did in Korea,
No.
but they were really big about conflict. It's not a war because it's not declared.
Right.
Well, Congress authorized the use of force against a whole country. That's a war.
Yes.
That's a
just
war.
because a declaration of war was not signed, it's still a war.
Just because you feel like you're fighting out of your weight class doesn't mean it's not
Yeah.
a war.
Yeah.
Ask the Boers. And
Right. They'll definitely tell you, we're definitely out of our weight class, but we're
Yes.
still fighting.
Right.
So we now find, like we mentioned earlier, just a few seconds ago, the protests of this.
We
this
started seeing
draft.
protests very early
Right.
in the process, and it's really all related to the draft. Because it's hard to see where anybody would protest protecting the South Vietnamese from communists other than pro-communist people,
Right.
which there were some, and we'll talk about that in a later episode.
But the reason most of these people are protesting is because, again, you see these deferments coming about.
Well, the college went
right.
first,
If
of
you
course,
were in
that's the-
college, of course, you were exempt from the draft, or
If you worked
know,
in certain fields,
correct.
like my dad's, maybe it was a cousin, worked for the water company.
Mhm.
You know, actually delivering water to homes in in Philadelphia through the tap, not from bottles.
Right.
So he was considered essential personnel. That seems kind of.
Yeah, that is a little.
How
odd.
essential is
Right.
he? Is he doing a job that really you can't go get 4 other people to do?
True.
You know, whatever. But
But-
it's that kind of thing though that feeds the resentment.
Oh yeah.
I can't get on with my life
Right.
until I'm 25,
Right. And again.
and I can't vote.
That's an even bigger point because
18
again.
to 21, I can't do diddly.
Yeah, and
I
that's
can drink in most days.
Yes, but again, most people, well, they were probably drinking.
Not in Missouri.
No, of course not. Kansas, however,
Yeah.
you just go across that border. But the idea, of course, is that hey, I'm 18, I'm 19, I'm 20 years old. I cannot vote for my president who is sending me over to this nation that I have no flippin' clue as to what it is and what is going on over there. But by golly, I guess I should just do it. Now, of course, there were some people that were drafted and they were thinking, okay, fine, that's my thing.
Well, I'm going to do my 2 years.
Yeah,
Elvis.
yeah,
He
right.
gets drafted. He goes to Germany for 2 years. He's done.
Jimi Hendrix is the same way.
Even during the height of Vietnam, not every draftee went to Vietnam.
right.
A lot of them went to Europe because we still had to keep our army and being there.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Well, I have
my dad joined the Air Force. He went to Kansas.
Right. Well, that's the funny thing is, I had a friend of mine. His dad was in the Army during Vietnam. I'm pretty sure he did get drafted. He stayed in Georgia through his
Right.
time as being a draftee, and so it's not like everybody went to the country.
Right.
You know,
It
they
wasn't
weren't in
like,
the thick of it.
you know, even Marines didn't all get sent.
Right.
They make it seem like, you know, in the movies especially, well, if you got drafted, you were going to Vietnam.
Yeah, it's a death sentence.
Yes, you had a good chance, but you only had a 2-year tour.
Right. They,
If you didn't go right away, you weren't going.
no, and
Unless
so
you volunteered.
right, bigger paycheck,
Well, yeah, you get combat pay for the whole time you're there.
but you
Um,
also have to deal.
You have a
with
chance to get shot.
Yeah.
But for especially a lot of the RA,
Mm-hmm.
regular Army as opposed to US, the conscripts,
Mm-hmm.
this is the means to advancement. I mean, you
Right.
could be an E5
Oh yeah.
within 6 months of entering.
Right.
Whereas if you were a draftee, you weren't getting above a specialist.
Mm-hmm.
If you were lucky. Probably PFC by the time you got out.
Right.
Because you're only there for 2 years.
Yeah, you don't have enough time in.
You start getting those straight hash marks on your sleeve
Yeah,
that you've been in combat and you're wearing 2 patches, 2 shoulder flashes.
that's big time.
That means you have a chance for, if you're going to make this a career,
Yeah.
or you're even thinking about making it a career, or you're just like a lot of the people that went to Iraq and Afghanistan. There's no point in joining up and doing this job, whatever it is, infantry,
Mhm.
airborne, mortarman, whatever it is,
Right.
if you're never going to use it when the country needs you to use it.
Right.
It's not like you're going to go out and start a war and start murdering people.
Well,
But the idea that this is something I'm good at, this is something I've trained for, it seems silly for me to sit in Kansas
right.
and blow the heck out of the prairie. I'm practicing once a
Right.
month,
Yeah.
if not less, because all the money's going to the troops there.
Yeah.
When I could get higher pay, I get my combat pay,
Right.
and I'm still a mortarman. I'm not going to be humping through the boonies mostly.
Nope. I'm going to be behind the lines.
I'm going to be at least behind barbed wire.
Yeah, I'm going to be waiting for those calls, and we're going to put in the coordinates.
So why not volunteer?
Right.
Because it has nothing to do with the cause. Because, let's put it this way. John F. Kennedy tried. Lyndon Johnson, I don't even know if he bothered to try, really. I mean, I guess he did in his own little corrupt politician way. But I don't believe that they very successfully painted the picture of why we were there. Now, granted, Truman, I thought, did a pretty good job of painting the picture of why we're there, and people still didn't like the war.
Right, yeah. He started in 1945, 1946, bringing us over to, well, Korea.
Asia.
Right, that area, and protecting our assets.
Mm-hmm.
But,
yeah, you know, the idea that we would, another war in Asia, everybody still had a bad taste about how Korea ended because we didn't
Correct.
win.
right.
We basically had a draw.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to be a popular war, I don't think, no matter what you do. But I don't feel, from the stuff I've read and the speeches I've seen, I just don't see that they lay out a plan of what we're going to accomplish in South Vietnam other than fight communism, that big banner.
I think that was the big deal. We wanted to prevent the domino theory from taking into effect. We wanted to make sure that South Vietnam did not fall to the communists.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's the big concern, though. When you are running a political war, where again we talked off camera, when Johnson has those strategic tactical maps in the Oval Office or in the strategic room,
Yeah.
the war room, you're not caring about what the actual strategy of this war is. You're just trying to do whatever you can in order to make it seem better.
I think in a lot of ways, Lee Harvey Oswald doomed the Vietnam War.
I agree.
Because I think Kennedy would have spent a whole lot more time selling the war.
Right.
Because, barring some sort of miracle, he would have beat Goldwater in '64.
There's no doubt.
I mean, because Johnson, yes, he was riding that post-assassination wave that helped, but he still wasn't even significantly threatened by Goldwater. Goldwater was way too far extreme.
Yeah.
For most people. But I just don't feel like Johnson. Johnson, I think, because he was the older generation.
Right.
He was, cutting his teeth in World War II.
Right.
I think he expected a whole lot more deference from the American people to the experts, including himself.
It doesn't work that way.
Well, definitely not. I mean, TV changed that.
For sure.
I mean, we have too many talking heads, even when we only have 3 networks.
Right.
But I just feel like that was one of the biggest things. Again, whether we should have been there or not is a completely different argument.
Right.
I'm just saying, if you're going to go, and Johnson went,
Right. Go all out.
you got to sell this to the American
Right.
people. Tell them why their sons are going there and dying.
Yeah.
Even if it's a trickle at the time it starts,
Yes.
you have to explain to them what the plan is. How are we going to get this war won? Because, I mean, at least in Korea there was we're going to at least save South Korea. We have a line that we can draw
Yes,
on a map.
yes.
That you can't draw a line on the map for South Korea.
No,
It's
because
totally a guerrilla war.
Right, because so many VC are moving down through the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So many of these infiltrated villages where American troops, which unfortunately the way that we do fight this war is we don't stay long in areas.
Right, because we're not trying to take ground.
No.
We're trying to find the enemy and kill him.
Right. Which brings us to the next point of having more of these body counts. Which body counts are what we will fight. Well, for the lack of a better term, we're going to die on the hill of getting more body counts.
Attrition.
Right.
We gotta win that war.
More of them compared to us.
And you know, in this defense, that's how you win a war of attrition.
Well,
More
sure.
of them die than you.
Right. Westmoreland has a plan of okay.
And it's not a bad plan. It
No.
just takes a lot of guys.
It does.
It takes a lot of people, which is why we see that number jump to almost 400,000 at the end of 66.
Right.
And almost 500,000 by the end of 67.
Which is a massive increase. And
oh, yeah.
well, again, you start out with, you know, in the beginning of 65, you're at like, you know, 3,500 troops at the beginning of 65.
Oh, yeah, yeah, at the very beginning. All you've really got is advisors.
Right. And then by the end of, you know, 67, you're into
You got
almost half a million.
Yeah,
That's huge. That's
100%
huge.
increase.
Right.
Or, well, no, 1,000%.
1,000% increase, which is
Or 10,000%. You
regardless
multiplied
of
by 100. That's what you did.
it, regardless of it, you're having.
This is why
you're
we're
having-
history majors.
Exactly. Regardless of the increase in how much percentage, there are people who are just they're supporting, they're trying to get more of the VC and the NVA knocked out. But it's hard. It's hard to do that because you don't know who is who.
Well, yeah, when you walk into a village, they all are Vietnamese. They all speak Vietnamese.
Right.
You don't have enough Vietnamese to know whether that's a South Vietnamese accent or a North Vietnamese. You know,
Right.
They don't go Didi Mao like they're from the South. You know, I'm sure, realistically, there probably is an accent
Yes,
difference.
but we can't tell it.
But we don't know it. Even our interpreters aren't telling us anything. And so the VC can just literally, like all good guerrillas, can fade into the population.
Correct.
And they have the advantage in the fact that they believe and they use and enforce the death penalty
Right.
for cooperation.
Right.
They understand, but they're not stupid.
No. By
They
any means.
understand a certain amount of cooperation is going to be necessary to not get relocated or resettled.
Yeah.
And you don't want a cooperative village chief resettled somewhere else.
No,
You
of
want him
course
right
not.
where he is. So
Mhm.
if he has to give up an arms cache on the other side of the valley, okay, we don't want to lose the weapons, but now the Americans trust him.
Right.
So we can funnel guys through his village all day long.
Right.
And the Americans are going to be thinking he's going to tell us. No.
No.
No. So it was now obviously the Vietnamese, Viet Cong and the NVA had just as many incompetent boobs
Yes.
in uniform with guns
Mhm.
as we did.
Mm-hmm.
And so they didn't always work that way. Sometimes they just end up killing the entire village leadership, and it was basically everybody was too scared to disagree.
Right.
But that becomes fairly obvious too to Americans walking through that everybody there is absolutely terrified to speak to you. Well, if there are no VC anywhere nearby, why would they be that scared unless you've been shooting at them recently?
Right.
And you haven't been,
Right.
typically.
Yeah, most of the time.
I mean, when's my lie? 69 or 67?
Uh,
I think it's an odd number year. That's
yeah.
why I can't ever
I'm
remember.
pretty sure that one's going to be 67 if I remember. But regardless of it, what do we see now? We're seeing now Americans going out and being on the forefront. And like what you had mentioned off camera, this is now the Americanization of the war.
Yes, I mean, that's borrowing a phrase that hasn't been technically invented yet, Vietnamization.
Right, but
But we basically were like, okay, it's like a tag team wrestling match.
right,
Okay, guys, you can't handle them. Tag, I'm coming in, and I'm going to land on them with both feet.
right,
And honestly, we do. We're much better at war than the South Vietnamese.
we've been at it for a little longer than they have.
Well, and we
We have the technology.
World War One or World War Two. World War Two taught us probably one of the most valuable lessons is you can't stop learning.
True.
Because technology is going to keep changing, and you have to keep keeping up with that.
Yeah.
If you don't, you lose. And it's a lesson that kudos to our military leadership that they've at least managed to follow through on that.
Right.
That we don't stop
Improving.
changing and improving and trying to come up with new ways of doing things with new technology.
Right.
Which means, of course, that the VC are on the short end of a really big stick that goes boom.
Right.
But it puts the ARVN on the bench. They start taking over garrison duties,
Right.
and they start taking over patrols on certain roads. That's just what
Right.
they do.
And they're not your major, and they're not your back roads. These are your major intersections.
Highways, Highway
These are-
1.
Right. These are things that they know that well, there probably won't be any VC. There probably won't be any NBA. And if there is, well,
Right.
we're
Well,
gonna have
that's
an
why we
American
have a
there.
regiment of us
Right.
hanging on this bridge.
Right.
You know, you see some of that in was it Hamburger Hill.
Mhm.
You see they go across the bridge and it's got ARVN at both ends.
Right.
It's all protected by the ARVN, but realistically, how good are they? Because garrison troops can be trained fairly well, but they just don't have the experience to fight outside of those garrisons.
Right.
And so you start losing what little edge there was on the sword of the ARVN was getting dulled pretty quickly because the varsity had come to play.
Yes. We put our A team, as in Americans,
Yes.
into the forefront, and the South Vietnamese, they're just okay. We're gonna tag along.
Well, I mean, honestly, if I'm South Vietnamese, I'd sure like to guard this bridge instead of go beat through the bush.
Exactly, because I don't want to deal with the booby traps. I don't want to deal with
Exactly.
anything like that. Which
Right.
which that will come into play later on in future episodes of how the South Vietnamese just kind of don't have the, like we say, the experience. They don't have the understanding.
Especially that lieutenant through captain level.
Right.
Those small unit commanders have to practice their craft, or it turns into a second lieutenant with a map joke.
Right.
Honestly, and
Yeah.
when you're talking about a major or maybe a light colonel moving 1,000 men through the jungle, and it turns into a second lieutenant with a map joke, people are dying
Yes.
for no good reason. No matter how good the troops are, you can't beat bad leadership.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you watched our thing on World War II, the Italians would be
Yes.
the perfect example.
Oh my gosh, their troops were really good. They
Their
were
soldiers-
well disciplined.
Yeah.
They knew what to do, but unfortunately, their middle officer corps was
Yeah.
more party members.
Well,
And
you had to be a
couldn't-
fascist.
right?
You had to know the latest party jargon, and you needed
Right.
to know what Mussolini had for dinner. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, and how many times he needed to go to the bathroom, I guess. But
Nothing that had to do with fighting a war. Really.
correct.
It's one of the reasons that the Germans got so much respect, because even that affected the Germans, but typically on the upper end of the camp.
Right.
Although it did affect lower down too, because they got scared of showing initiative.
True.
You know, sometimes the best thing to do is get out of the area
Yeah.
and pull back and regroup and then go fight.
Right.
Otherwise, you don't want to fight in somebody else's battlefield,
Of course not.
not the one they decided to fight you in,
Right.
which is what Americans learned. Really, the only big battle is Hill 875,
Yes.
which is, if you watch Hamburger Hill, that's not it. That
No.
happens later. But it's the same thing. And the problem is it's a bad sale
Right.
to the American people again, because once again, you're giving it a geographic title, Hill 875. This is the battle for Hill 875. No, actually, we're there and we're attacking that hill because the VC are there.
Right.
And we're trying to kill as many as possible. We've got them trapped right near Cambodia.
Right.
We know we can kill them. Let's go kill them.
Yeah.
And of course, it's 100 some American dead, which is a huge number. And of course, it hits the TV screens.
Oh, every night.
Guys coming back, getting into helicopters with bandages all over
Yeah.
them. And that just never, signs of body bags laying along the road, because that whole thing that we talked about around Tarawa, which
Mhm.
was the first time American wounded and dead had been shown on camera to the American people,
Right.
that starts in Vietnam immediately.
Of course. Well, the news coverage wants people to see it.
Right, and it hasn't changed forever. If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah. True.
That whether it's a car accident, a house fire, or combat.
Right. Whatever it is.
Yeah,
You start your news coverage with body counts.
And unfortunately, the vast majority
Mm-hmm.
of the people reporting the news have no military experience
Right.
because they got deferred because of college. They're college graduates,
Yeah.
and they've been working in this field, but they don't understand what it does to do a blocking action.
Yeah.
Because everything is pointed to a map. This is what we're going to do,
Mm-hmm.
which says it's about territory.
Uh-huh.
But the real battle is body count.
Right.
Still, it's
Right.
about body count.
Right. The war of attrition is continuing. And
Mm-hmm.
it won't go away for a couple of years now. It
Yeah.
won't be until
I'm not sure it ever really goes away.
I don't think so.
It just gets de-emphasized.
right.
We're still doing the same things, though, even up to the end of the war, to a large extent.
Yeah.
We never try to take territory and hold it.
No,
because
we just
can't. We don't have enough guys.
No.
We have to have 2 million guys.
Right. And we don't want to go that far.
And then as we move into the fall and early winter of '67,
Mm-hmm.
contact gets lighter and lighter.
Mm-hmm.
There's less combat. There's less body count. Our body count stays the same because booby traps.
Yes.
You know, roadside bombs. I mean, it's just basically Iraq.
Right.
I mean, it's IEDs. Improved.
Right. It's
improvised explosive devices.
And I mean, some of those
Bungee sticks.
Well, much. The bungee, the booby traps of the of the Viet Cong are just atrocious.
Well,
the punji
Punji stick, yeah.
Everything that you can think
Punji
of.
steak, I guess.
Right. The nails that are rusted. The
just broken glass.
Right.
I mean,
the tripwires underneath the, of course, massive amounts of water that you're walking through.
How do you spot a tripwire that's under muddy water?
Right. It just doesn't work. But you know, it's almost like you're looking for tracks in the woods as a camper or something along those lines.
It's like hunting polar bears in Arizona.
Right.
They're just not there.
Right.
And the polar bears are leaving bombs.
Yeah. You don't know where to go. You don't know how to do it.
And from everything I've read and even seen in movies, which are usually not very favorable, period,
no,
to the military, the lower echelons and the intelligence community were like, this is bad.
Yeah.
This is really bad. There's something big's coming because there's no reason for them to have abandoned these areas or refused to fight us for certain villages and things that typically were VC.
Right.
So what's going on? But the upper echelon, because of course they have to sell something to the cameras,
yes,
are claiming that we're winning because of body count.
Right.
And they're not wrong. We have dished out a whole lot of damage.
We have.
I mean, Dragon alone was what, almost 20-1?
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty good body count.
But again, it's an artificial, it's an inflated amount of body count.
And I don't want to besmirch anybody's honor, but let's put it this way: if I'm a second lieutenant or a captain, and I'm out in the bush and I'm only doing a year tour, because that's all I'm doing, and say I'm a captain and I want to make the Army my career,
sure,
you're not going to get promoted to major quickly if you have a bad record of low body counts in Vietnam.
Right.
So I'm not even talking about it, because there are examples of people just outright lying.
Right.
But I mean, even if you're not going to go that far, you're not going to be downplaying blood trails.
No.
And things like that. You're going to count everything.
Right.
So if you claim there's 14 dead at this encounter, you're not going to think it's wrong. You're not thinking it's lying. You're just counting what you're counting because you know the number has to be bigger.
Yes.
Well, what if it's only 7 and the other 7 are just wounded and they'll be back in action in a month? You don't know that. You can't prove anything. And I'm not saying I'm besmirching anybody's honor. I'm just saying the politics of the situation led people to inflate their numbers.
Right.
We see it in all sorts of activities. The rounding up.
Right.
I'm reporting 4. Well, the next level reports a half a dozen, and then it's 8. So suddenly, by the time it gets to division or MAC v SOG or MAC v in Saigon, we killed 20.
Right.
Well, no, the
really
second lieutenant
4.
reported 4.
Right.
And 2 blood trails or something,
Right.
And so the next guy up said 6, and
it just is continuing. But
everybody needs those numbers padded. Everybody has a vested interest in making the numbers higher.
Right.
And keeping their numbers low.
Yes.
Yeah, that's also very important.
Right, because we want to be the ones that are the winners, and by being the winners, we have the lower numbers.
Right, the one with the most score wins.
Yeah.
And of course, as we move into that time frame, the winter, like I say winter, it's not really cold.
It's not really a winter, no.
We're at 19 degrees north.
Right.
We don't have a lot of winter going on.
It's more of a, maybe a mild season.
Or, I don't remember when monsoon season is there. I'm sure I could look that up. But it's bad.
Yeah.
But either way, you just have this sense that the upper echelons, especially once you leave country, don't really have any idea what's going on. And they're selling this lack of contact and this lowering of American deaths, because that does come out about too.
Yeah.
As a sign that the war is near won.
But
Which of course makes, if they wouldn't have done that, again, propaganda is a very powerful tool in war.
Mm-hmm.
What we're coming up to next, you know, for those of you who have any idea about Vietnam, you know what's coming next.
Yes.
In the form of the Tet Holiday. If the American people hadn't been those supporters, which is not a very large majority,
Right.
less than 60% of people really actively support the war by the end of '67.
Mm-hmm.
They just see it as way too expensive, too many lives lost for not a whole lot of gain.
Right.
And so when you throw out there that the war's nearly won,
You're
setting
asking-
yourself up for failure.
Right.
Well, you're setting yourself up for the same thing the Germans did themselves in the winter of '41. By the number of casualties and bodies that they piled up in the Soviet army,
Right.
they believed that the Soviet army was almost non-existent.
Boy, were they wrong.
Boy, were they wrong. So, but that brings us up 500,000 men.
Oh, yes.
Things are looking good if you talk to DC or even Saigon. But if you talk in the woods
No,
and
they're-
the fire bases and you talk to the intel guys, they're like, something's coming.
Yes.
Something's coming. In fact, we already know because the battle doesn't effectively start till January 21st. But the contact reports around a insignificant Marine base at Khe Sanh are already picking up
Mm-hmm.
as we move into '68. So
Be sure to watch that one.
yeah.
You'll be in for a pleasant surprise.